The world is one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation. These were the words of United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who issued a dire warning during the opening of a long-due meeting to review the landmark Non-Proliferation Treaty, a treaty aimed at keeping the proliferation of nuclear weapons in check. As per the UN Secretary General, the world is currently at heightened risk of a nuclear accident, the highest it has been since the peak of the Cold War. Why? There's a host of reasons. North Korea is gearing up for its 7th nuclear test. Iran can just not seem to find a middle ground to reach an agreement and return to the 2015 nuclear deal. And Russia is currently indulging in reckless nuclear saber-rattling. What does this mean for us? What lies ahead? Hello and welcome to The Full Context. My name is Saroya. Let's begin.
Today, humanity is just one misunderstanding, one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation. We need the treaty of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons as much as ever.
If Western countries try and test our resolve, Russia will not back down. And this is not the language of threat. This is simply a statement of what is possible. Such is the logic of deterrence.
Even till about a decade ago, the idea of a nuclear war was the stuff of fiction. It was at most plot of a Hollywood movie. But in February this year, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin raised alarm globally when he said this.
I order the defense minister and the chief of the general staff of the Russian armed forces to put the deterrence forces of the Russian army into a special mode of combat service.
With one announcement, President Vladimir Putin had the world wondering, would he really? Could there be a nuclear-armed conflict in the near future? Russia has the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. It's been done before. In 1945, the United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan. Then in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis almost brought the United States and Russia on the brink of a nuclear war, which is why in 1968, the world agreed on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It came into effect in 1970, and essentially all nuclear-powered countries agreed to reduce their arsenals of nuclear weapons, and in exchange, other countries agreed not to pursue nuclear weapons at all. Almost every nation on Earth signed up to the NPT, including the 5 biggest nuclear powers. 191 is the exact figure here, but among the handful of states never to sign are 4 known or suspected to have nuclear weapons. These include India, Israel, North Korea and Pakistan. This week, the United Nations Secretary General issued a dire warning as he opened a conference for countries signed up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Humanity is in danger of forgetting the lessons forged in the terrifying fires of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Geopolitical tensions are reaching new highs. Competition is trumping cooperation and collaboration. Distrust has replaced dialogue, and disunity has replaced disarmament. States are seeking false security in stockpiling and spending hundreds of billions of dollars on doomsday weapons that have no place on our planet. Almost 13,000 nuclear weapons are now being held in arsenals around the world. All these at a time when the risks of proliferation are growing and guardrails to prevent escalation are weakening. We have been extraordinarily lucky so far, but luck is not a strategy, nor is it a shield from geopolitical tensions boiling over into nuclear conflict.
Now, today, some 13,000 nuclear weapons are thought to remain in service in the arsenals of 9 nuclear-armed states, which is far lower than the estimated 60,000 stockpiled during the peak of the mid-1980s. Now, on Tuesday, Russia's representative to the United Nations Review Conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty warned that Russia would not back down if Western countries tested its resolve. Russia also rejected allegations that Russia threatened to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine.
If Western countries try to test our resolve, Russia will not back down. And this is not the language of threat. This is simply a statement of what is possible. Such is the logic of deterrence. The grounds for this decision were the confrontational actions and provocative statements by representatives of Western nuclear powers regarding the possibility of NATO interference in military actions in Ukraine against Russia.
And Russia also found itself criticized at the conference.
War marks a turning point. A permanent member of the UN Security Council is blatantly breaching the UN Charter and trying to subdue its smaller neighbor. In attacking a country that gave up nuclear weapons, Russia is brutally violating the assurances it gave in the Budapest Memorandum.
Now, for better understanding, we're now being joined by Tim Wright, spokesperson coordinator for the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which also won the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. Now, you heard the UN chief. He's warned of a miscommunication prompting a nuclear conflict. He said it's been luck that has prevented a nuclear confrontation so far. Do you believe that is plausible? How do you assess the statement?
Yes, we very much agree with the UN Secretary General's assessment. Luck is not a strategy, but luck is what has got us to where we are. There's a very real danger that nuclear weapons will be used again. Most experts agree that the risk is as high today as it has been since the Cold War, and the only way to eliminate that risk of nuclear weapons being used is to eliminate the weapons. And there's very little progress being made, unfortunately, towards getting to zero nuclear weapons.
Right. Now, also, of course, let's talk about the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. How successful do you think it has been in putting a cap on the proliferation of nuclear weapons, which is essentially what it was supposed to do? Do you reckon we need better ironclad policies or monitoring systems?
The Non-Proliferation Treaty has been very successful in preventing the spread of nuclear weapons to more countries. At the time that it was negotiated in the 1960s, there was a widespread belief that 20 or 30 or more countries would one day develop nuclear weapons. That didn't happen. Countries came on board and said that they wouldn't develop them. But the other side of the deal was that the countries that already had them at the time, the 5 countries being the United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, would negotiate for the elimination of their nuclear weapon stockpiles. And that hasn't happened. So they haven't lived up to their side of the bargain. So in that respect, the Non-Proliferation Treaty hasn't been successful. And what was negotiated in 2017 was the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This is a different treaty that goes a step further and says all nuclear weapons, no matter who possesses them, are illegal. And it also establishes a clear framework for eliminating nuclear weapons stockpiles. Unfortunately, the nuclear armed states haven't joined this treaty yet, but it's about stigmatizing the weapons and building pressure for disarmament, because we feel that that pressure isn't great enough at the moment.
All right. Well, Mr. Wright, I'm going to request you to please stay on with us. We will come back to you. Now, the world's biggest powers might have once pledged to work towards a world without nuclear weapons. But a new report suggests that the global stockpiles are expected to rise in the coming decade. The report comes amid growing Western concerns over efforts by both China and North Korea to expand their nuclear capabilities. China's defense minister said in June that the country had made impressive progress in developing new nuclear weapons. The United States, meanwhile, said that North Korea is preparing to conduct its 7th nuclear test.
As we gather today, Pyongyang is preparing to conduct its 7th nuclear test.
Now, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the United States and Russia remain by far the world's largest nuclear powers, with 3,708 and 4,477 nukes respectively. China has 350, France at 290, Britain 180. But China's warhead count has increased in the recent years, up from 145 warheads in 2006, according to the institute. The Pentagon predicts that the Chinese stockpile is at least double in size and will in the next decade. China has maintained that its nuclear weapons would be used in self-defense and to prevent a nuclear war, while the stockpiles of both the United States and Russia declined in 2021. Stockholm Research Institute believes an alarming longer-term trend will see both countries increase their stockpiles and develop more powerful weapons. North Korea's secrecy makes it hard to gauge its nuclear abilities. Some estimates put its current stockpile at 20 nuclear warheads, though the United States believes it is working to increase this number and its ability to deliver them as well. Pyongyang has already conducted a record number of ballistic missile launches in 2022. The think tank also said that it believed that North Korea now had enough fissile material to produce up to 55 warheads. But its ability to deliver these weapons remains unknown. The report also said India and Pakistan were making efforts to expand their nuclear arsenals. It said Israel, which does not publicly acknowledge possessing nuclear weapons, was trying to modernize its arsenal. Stockpile estimates for India and Pakistan stood at 160 and 165 respectively, and for Israel at 90. However, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has raised concerns that nuclear weapons could be used outside of a testing situation for the first time since 1945. Once again, we're being joined by Mr. Wright. Thank you so much for staying on with us. Now, this, of course, isn't just about Russia and Ukraine. The Iran nuclear deal talks have been at an impasse. North Korea has given the world reasons to worry as well, with reports of them preparing for a 7th nuclear test. What is your calculation of the same? These countries are not even part of the NPT.
Yes, well, North Korea withdrew from the NPT. Iran is part of the NPT, but there are concerns about its compliance with the treaty. It's a very dire state of affairs. I think expectations are very low for this conference that's taking place in New York right now, but we need to raise the expectations. We need to really urge these countries to fulfill their legal obligations. The vast majority of the world's countries don't have nuclear weapons. They reject nuclear weapons entirely. They want the countries with nuclear weapons to get rid of them. And we need to demand that, just as the UN Secretary General has done, and so many other leaders around the world are saying that these weapons are absolutely horrific. A single weapon is powerful enough to destroy an entire city. And if one nuclear weapon is used, it's very likely that another will be used in retaliation, and we don't know where it might end. So that's the kind of scenario that we really need to work together as an international community to avoid by getting rid of nuclear weapons completely.
All right. Well, Mr. Wright, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of The Full Context.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, meanwhile, the European Union has issued a new proposal aimed at salvaging the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran has responded saying it seeks a quick conclusion. But why is the 2015 nuclear deal so important? Let's just try and understand how we got to this point. What did this deal do? Iran has always insisted its nuclear program is peaceful, but in 2010, the United Nations, the United States and the EU got suspicious that the country was developing a nuclear bomb and imposed crippling sanctions on Tehran. Then in 2015, Iran reached a deal with 6 powers, China, France, Germany, Russia, the United States and the UK, that saw it limit its nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. One of the main areas of concern here was Iran's production of enriched uranium, which is civilian uses as well, but can also be used in nuclear weapons. Restrictions were placed on the amount of material that it could stockpile, the level of purity, the number and the type of centrifuge machines used to carry out this enrichment. Iran also agreed to allow international inspections, but this deal collapsed in 2018. Then US President Donald Trump abandoned this deal, reinstated US sanctions. He wanted a new deal that would also curb Iran's ballistic missile program and its involvement in regional conflicts. Iran refused and its economy plunged into recession as the sanctions took effect. When they were tightened in 2019, Iran began breaching the deal's restrictions. Its stockpile of enriched uranium is now many times larger than permitted. Part of it is just below the purity needed for a bomb, and hundreds of advanced centrifuges are spinning. Now, amidst all talks over the Iran nuclear deal, Tehran has announced activation of 100 of new generation uranium enrichment centrifuges, a mandatory process to create effective nuclear fuel. The move came in response to a new wave of US sanctions on firms that allegedly helped sell Iranian oil. The US Treasury and the US State Departments imposed sanctions on a total of 6 companies, 4 based in Hong Kong, 1 in Singapore, 1 in the United Arab Emirates. Iran slammed the United States' move, claiming that the sanctions target its crucial energy sector.
In response to American action, we started pumping gas into hundreds of a new generation of centrifuges last night, based on the decision made. Americans should not think that they can gain concessions at the negotiating table with these actions. America should put aside excessive ambition. We are a people of negotiation and logic.
Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency chief warned that Iran's nuclear program is moving at a fast pace. International Atomic Energy Body's chief, Rafael Grossi, further claimed that the agency needs a degree of access to assess the characteristics of Iran's nuclear program.
The Iran of 2022 is the nuclear program is very different from the one in 2015. And I think everybody recognizes that, starting with the Iranians, who are saying that they are making strides and amazing advances, and the program is moving ahead very, very fast, and not only ahead but sideways as well, because it's growing in ambition and in capacity. That doesn't mean we cannot verify it, but quite clearly we need the degree of access commensurate with the characteristics of that program.
Now, as the international community battles multiple crises on multiple fronts, there's renewed focus now on Taiwan and China's increasing assertiveness in the region. U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan has drawn the ire of China. Within an hour of her landing, Beijing announced that its army would conduct a series of live-fire military drills in the air and at sea around Taiwan from Thursday to Sunday. Beijing also summoned the U.S. ambassador to condemn Pelosi's trip. China has also rolled out economic sanctions. It announced curbs on the import of fruit and fish from Taiwan, while halting shipments of sand to the island. Taiwan is on high alert, but says it will not back down. What does this visit mean for U.S.-China relations? How does this affect regional security? To understand this better, we're now being joined by Paul Huang, research fellow at Taiwanese Public Opinion Foundation and senior journalist.
Chairperson Delbene.
Mr. Wang, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Taiwan once again finds itself under renewed pressure from China. Beijing has issued warnings before as well that it will not hesitate to use force to bring the island nation under its control. But with military drills on the horizon, how far do you assess China will go to assert its control over Taiwan?
Well, China always claimed Taiwan as part of its territory, and it has never made secret its plan to subjugate Taiwan by force if necessary. But I expect China's exercises following Nancy Pelosi's visit this time, it might just be a show of force to coerce Taiwan psychologically and politically. So I don't expect this to be a prelude to some full-scale invasion. But this is not to say that a major war or invasion is not on the horizon in the future. No one can predict when China will move on to Taiwan to invade Taiwan in a full-scale war. But we know that as the military balance across the straits are becoming more and more favored to favorable to China, that the cost and the potential risk for China to attack Taiwan also decrease, and Beijing might eventually find that they want to commit to such a military solution to bring an end to achieve their ambition over Taiwan. And the fact is that the military balance across the strait, Taiwan Strait, is heavily tilted in favor of China. So China spent a considerable amount of resources and money and manpower upgrading, expanding its People's Liberation Army, which now possess numerous advantages over Taiwan in many domains.
Right. Also, the United States has said repeatedly that it will supply arms to Taiwan so it can defend itself while maintaining their policy towards Taiwan and also agreeing to the One China principle. So the idea remains unchanged. How much longer can the United States keep up with this balancing act if it really wants to exert its influence in the region?
Well, I think there are signs that Taiwanese public confidence in the U.S. defense of Taiwan has eroded serious decrease following the Russian-Ukraine war earlier this year. Our opinion poll that done by our foundation, found that the percentage of Taiwanese people who believe the United States will send troops to defend Taiwan if China attacks decreased by more than 30% after the outbreak of Ukraine war. So in October 2021, 60% of the people said, when asked, they said they believe the United States would send troops to defend Taiwan. But after the Ukraine war, only about 35 to 40% of people said they believe they have faith in U.S. defense of Taiwan. So about 20 and 30% of the people changing their mind, and that confidence really has, so that's an evidence that the confidence in U.S. defense has collapsed. And for me and for other analysts, that really means that people in Taiwan are becoming more aware that the so-called U.S. commitment to Taiwan is nowhere guaranteed. And the people's confidence in the U.S., in the United States, is quite easily shaken by changing world events.
Well, all right, Mr. Wang, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. Now, it's a period of heightened tensions, increased threat of nuclear accident due to severed communication channels between the West, Russia and China, emerging threats not only from the war in Ukraine but from Asia, the Middle East as well. How effectively will the international community and world powers tackle these issues remains to be seen. And with that, we call to wrap on this edition of The Full Context. Thank you for joining us on WION World is One. Global news continues on the other side. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.